Serious. Parents of sociopaths, psychopaths, or people who have done terrible things, how do you feel about your offspring? I had my son when I was young. He was unplanned. His mother and I had been together for over a year when she got pregnant. I was working at a pizza place when he was born. I remember the first time I saw him. He had big blue eyes and looked a lot like his mother. I loved him the first time I saw him. I told myself I was going to do whatever it took to bring him happiness. The first 3 months were wonderful. I was learning how to be a father and I spent a lot of time with him. Times got rough, money was a problem, and my relationship with his mother was a disaster. We fought a lot and screamed. I regret those screams. She developed a dependence on prescription pills after an operation, and there was constant malaise when we were together. She wasn't the same. I tried to help her, but she wouldn't let me. More fighting ensued. A week after his first birthday, I found out that his mother had been cheating on me. There was no reconciliation possible. It was broken. I moved out and tried to get custody but lost in court. I only saw him every 2 weeks. He was a normal child and liked Pokemon a lot. We would watch it together when he was at my place. I gave him gifts, cuddled him, and told him I loved him and was proud of him while he was growing up. And then things changed. At around 8 years old, he became distant, rarely talked, was prone to fits, and spent most of his time in his room. I tried to get him to talk to me, but it was useless. Saw a huge bruise on his left shoulder one day. I asked him where he got it, and he shrugged it off. Then it was a broken finger and then a rib. I contacted the police. His mother said he was clumsy and always fell, but my son finally admitted that she punished him, but the cops did nothing. They finally got his custody. She was declared unfit. He was never the same. The joyful child he was gone. I tried to get him help, but he'd run off. I tried to get him to meet a counselor, but he ditched the meeting. As he was going through adolescence, I saw less and less of him. He started to hang out with questionable kids and got into a lot of mischief, including the use of illegal substances. I did what I could to get him off the slippery slope, but to no avail. He hated me. The more I told him I loved him, the more he despised me. I found needles on his room's floor. And when I asked him about it, he pulled a weapon at me, called me a freaking piece of dog crap, and ran away. He never came back home. On October 8th, 2009, I got a phone call I'll never forget. It was my son, calling from jail. "Help me, Dad. They're saying that I violated some girl." My son had apparently picked a girl from the mall, told her he was some kind of talent scout, brought her to his friend's apartment, knocked her out, and did that. He denied it and claimed his innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. I visited him in prison until one day I asked him why he did it. He looked at me with the coldest face and said, "I had too much free time in my hands." I cried and he laughed. I have not seen him since. I'd like to tell you that life got better, but I can't. I have constant nightmares. You hear the whispers of people when they see me. His mother blamed me for what happened and told me I treated him like a prince. I sometimes sit, look at the floor, and weep. I loved my boy. I would have done anything for him, but I can't accept the darkness that took over and replaced him. Story 2. Keep in mind, first of all, that sociopaths and psychopaths aren't clinical diagnoses. I'm answering this using the commonly accepted layperson's idea of this term. I adopted a boy about 14 years ago. It was the worst decision of my entire life. He was born to a young, substance-dependent runaway mother. He was either her second or third child, depending on who was asked, and she had at least one more after him. When he was around 1 or 2, his mom still managed to keep custody of him, an older sibling, and a new baby. There are differing reports of what kids live there and who they belong to. She was mostly couch surfing with similar situationed friends. He was ignored. From all reports from people who knew the mom, he was ignored while his mom foisted attention on the siblings. She then left him at a friend's place for a year. She said she couldn't cope with 3 kids, only 2 kids. He was the obvious choice. He was old enough to talk and listen when this happened, and no doubt he had some awareness that it was him who his mom didn't want while his siblings stayed home. While at the friend's place, he was mistreated. I won't go into that. He was put into care shortly after that, then a series of placements before settling down enough in one place that the system deemed him adoptable. In my very strong opinion, the system is usually to blame for what happened. They wrote a mostly fictional story about him, his personality, likes and dislikes, etc., to give to prospective parents. Don't get me wrong, they mostly meant well, but they were clueless. They were utterly clueless. The one person who seemed to understand what this kid was going to become, the psychiatrist I mentioned, was ignored by everyone that mattered. He was and is a sociopath. He lies, he steals, he hurts, he cheats. He can be incredibly superficially charming, but he leaves a truly awe-inspiring wake of emotional and physical destruction behind him everywhere he goes. I say awe-inspiring because unless you've spent time around this and truly understand how amazingly destructive this can be to a person's very self, you just don't get it. The psychiatrist, during pre-adoption, gave some warnings in her brief. The social worker, whose job it is to get kids adopted, pushed and pushed, poo-pooing the psychiatrist's reports, minimizing them, and insisting reports from his placements were biased. Now understand, I am not inexperienced. I have other kids. I've worked with special needs kids. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. Nothing, and I mean nothing, can prepare someone to have this inflicted on themselves. It changed me. It fundamentally changed me as a person. It did the same to everyone else in the family, in different ways. Friends tell me I'm less outgoing, slower to laugh, smile, and joke, less prone to trust, and far too matter-of-fact and blaze about everything. I've developed the latter as a survival defense mechanism. One learns quickly. One simply cannot react emotionally to anything, at all, ever, as it will be used brutally against you. Even when as a teen he steals your car and ignores you when confronting him in the driveway as he attempts to make his getaway, hurting you fairly badly, and then driving away while you lie there screaming, and then coming back hours later and acting as if nothing had happened, even conning the authorities into thinking it was a silly accident despite testimony and another witness account. He has stolen more things than I can imagine from home. Game consoles, electronics, and computers. He is indiscriminate. Now an adult, he steals just upon the stuff to pay off his peddler so he doesn't get into trouble. He's never held down a job for more than a week or two, and that only 3 or 4 times in his life. He survives by manipulating and stealing. But he knows it all and will tell everyone, including me, in detail how they're doing everything wrong and how easy it is to be wealthy. He doesn't appear to see the irony at all. He lies like most people breathe. Every word that comes out of his mouth is manipulative and untrue in some way. One learns to expect it. Nothing at all ever is at face value. It is horrible. He's horrible. I hate him. But I love him. I spent so much time and effort trying to help. He returned the effort by hurting, manipulating, lying, and stealing. I cannot help wishing he would get in a traffic accident, roughed up into a coma and be disabled. I cannot help feeling like a horrible, disgusting human being despite everything he's done for even allowing myself to think this. But I still think so. Again and again. He's no longer living here, but every time nobody's home, we return wondering what we'll be missing or wrecked. He doesn't get caught legally. He's just barely smart enough and charming enough to set up others instead. And somehow he manages to keep himself out of trouble. Mostly. He's been tuned up by former friends, investigated, etc., but so far he has managed to avoid serious repercussions. I have little doubt it will catch up with him eventually. Hopefully somebody won't be badly hurt before this happens. It's a constant nightmare, slowly getting better as our lives move apart, with the incredible help of friends and family to set and brutally enforce limits. He's a dangerous person, though. The moral of the story is, if there's any hint at all, of having a kid no ability for empathy, a lack of remorse, no moral development, and being incredibly superficially charming, then run. Run fast. Run hard. Run away and never ever look back. Just get away. Wow. Damn. Story 3. I think my mom is a sociopath. I was raised by my grandparents for the first 13 years of my life, but she was in and out for most of that time. When I was younger, her boyfriend tried to end me. She was mad at the time, but afterward, she didn't report it and we continued to stay with him. My grandpa was constantly mean to me. He made me sit on the floor, wouldn't let me talk around him, told me I was stupid, worthless, etc. That sucked. But when I went to live with my mother, who'd supposedly cleaned up her act, it got worse. Physical pain and terror were bad and everything, but my mom tried to unmake me. Her crap messed with my mind and almost drove me insane. By the time I moved out, I was planning to end her and then myself. And that would not have been the first or even second time someone tried to harm her. She would act like she was the only person who ever loved me. Not an unrealistic concept, considering how everybody else in our lives treated me. They'd be needlessly cruel and nasty. She has an ED, so we would crash diet together, and she always told me I would be so pretty if I just lost a few more pounds. When I tried to recover from my ED, she was actively negative. She complained about what I was doing to myself when I started to gain weight. Whenever I would try and stand up to her, she would cry and complain that I was taking advantage of her, being a terrible daughter, breaking her heart, etc. She would punish me, literally, with things that are against the Geneva Convention. She would keep me awake at night, and she would tell me detailed plans for self-harm. In the morning, she would wake up by dragging me out of bed by my feet, screaming the whole time about something I couldn't have possibly done to her. She would alternate concern and threats completely at random. I never knew what she would act like from minute to minute. She's told me before that she treated me so horribly because of my bad karma. If I ever tried to point out how toxic this all was, she would tell me I brought it on myself by being negative. The thing that makes her a sociopath is that this is not insane behavior. This is just the crap she did to keep me distracted and confused so that she could get $300 a month in state aid for having me in her house. If I'd ever be aware enough to leave, the money would have gone with me, which it eventually did when I did leave. She does it to my grandma. She tells her one thing, then another, then confuses them with each other. Then my uncle thinks my grandma is getting dementia, and my mom agrees because she needs grandma's car. She needs everybody to be upset so that grandma's confused to wonder why grandma's paying part of her rent. Her ex-boyfriend pays her car payment. For a while, she bragged that he still thought they were together, joking that he was too old and ugly. I know she mocks him because he can't get it up. He can't get it up because he has prostate cancer. He's a nice man, and she will do anything to ensure that she's in his will and that she gets as much out of him as she can before he passes away. To this day, she pretends she doesn't understand why she can't have my address. She asked me what she'd done to me lately to deserve such horrible treatment. Lately. The only reason she hasn't hurt me lately is because she doesn't know where I am and only has the most basic details of my life. So that's a sociopath? Man, that sounds just like a Karen. Does it mean they're one and the same? I guess when you look around, you'll realize that being a sociopath is more common than you think. The tricky part is how to best deal with them. Well, while you're figuring that out, why not subscribe to my channel? I'm sure you can pick up a trick or two from my other videos. And while you're at it, could you please like the video too? It'll definitely help me out. Story 4. I'm not a parent, but I have an older sister who I believe would be considered a sociopath. She's torn apart my family, physically hurt us, stolen from us, and lied to us, among other terrible things. My mother, the kindest woman in the world, has been completely physically and emotionally ravaged by my sister. Brandy was born 8 years ahead of me, in 1981. My mother was married to a cruel man at the time, Vic. He disappeared shortly after she was born and was never heard from again. However, Mom says she sees a lot of Vic in my sister and that he has a very similar personality. Eventually, my mom met my dad. She was extremely unhappy with the new addition to the family and would often have random fits of rage, throw things at my dad, and become physically violent. My dad just thought she needed to adjust to have a male role model in her life, and she would eventually settle down. That never happened. When I was born, it caused even more disruption. She would do bad things to me when I was happy because happy babies disgusted her. She also began stealing my toys, blankets, and binkies, throwing them in the trash. My parents started to grow concerned and started sending her to counseling. They could not figure out why she acted like this. They're kind, loving, caring parents, doing their best. Around this time, they found out they were pregnant again with my little sister, who was born about a year and a half after I was. One time, Brandy hurt my little sister, which terrified my parents. They were extremely scared, frustrated, and unprepared. They decided it might be best for her to live with my grandma 2 hours away. While she was there, she was tormented by my step-grandpa. Until he passed away, we found out years later, and my mom has never forgiven herself. This is when her life starts to spin out of control. She began stealing, lying, cheating, sleeping around, etc. She developed a substance and alcohol problem at an early age. She was then expelled from school, and several years later, she pushed my grandma to the ground and stole her car. She ended up with a man who was much older than her. Chris became a brother-in-law. He's an alkie, a felon, has a gambling problem, is a junkie, cruel, a thief, and just an all-around bad person. But he's terrified of Brandy. He once told me she was evil, an evil he never wants to experience again. He's currently in hiding with her son, who is also terrified of my sister. She ended up pregnant at 22. She doesn't care. She drinks, smokes, and takes pills. My nephew was born blind and developed autism. She would contact us when she needed something, but we couldn't ever find her. She would find us, and it always ended up hurting. She ran away from everyone with her son and abandoned him in a crib in an apartment in Alaska. It was horrible. She's 32 now. I have no idea where she is at the moment. My parents had a restraining order against her and moved. Here's a list of horrible things she's done to us. Stolen my vehicle and my mom's, broke into my parents' home, smashed every single dish, and pulled everything from the cabinets and pantry into a giant pile in the middle of the kitchen. Hurt my dad, tried to hurt me, abandoned my little sister and me at a mall 6 hours from home, tried to steal my identity, accused my brother-in-law of violating her, tried to hurt my grandmother in the hospital. She blames everything on her, etc. She always leaves a horrible mess of destruction and pain in her wake. She cons people for fun. She uses women and men. I'm sure she's probably ended someone at some point in her life, or will. She's charming until she has a complete breakdown. I don't even know how to explain the feeling she gives me. It is on a level of creepiness I've never experienced other than with her. Just her smile makes me sick. I think I just found a new fear: sociopaths and narcissists. Story 5. My brother is schizophrenic, a junkie, and an alcoholic. His schizophrenia was not diagnosed for a long time, and as a result, he wasn't properly treated until very late in his life. Growing up with him was a nightmare. He would hurt my sisters and me, he would steal money, he would take our bikes and wreck them, he would destroy things that he knew we liked, he would get hammered, baked, etc., and launch into episodes every holiday. It was hell all the time, but the holidays got him going. It once took 6 cops to wrestle him into submission to be hauled off to get medical treatment. The best parts of my childhood, pre-getting my license, were when he was in various mental institutions. It meant we finally had peace in the house. The list of hurts goes on and on and on, and it is very hard to fully articulate what it was like growing up with him. I could list dozens and dozens of hurts that he did to my sisters and me, and each would not do justice to describe the living hell it was to deal with him. I've read stories about people having cruel parents, and it is the same sort of thing. My parents were divorced, and my mom did her best. But what can one do with that when you have to work all day, and all you want to do at the end of the day is crash? The only good part of it all was that he consumed all of my mother's energy. Showers completely unsupervised, and when I got my license, I got myself a car and was pretty much never home after. In the summer, I would split for weeks. I drove to the Outer Banks of North Carolina from Charlottesville, Virginia, with nowhere to stay and lived out of the car, crashing at friends' places and sleeping on the porches of vacation homes for about a week. I did this with very little money and with no one knowing I had done it other than a few friends I hung around with. I actually had a ton of fun in high school, and when I got to college, I loved life. Mental illness is a serious disability, and living with a disabled person is a nightmare. Story 6. My brother is in jail. He's adopted, which is only important because it means I can sleep at night knowing that I don't possess the potential that he has. He has ADHD, FAE, FAD, ODD, ODS, RAD, and is bipolar and very aggressive. He doesn't have a legal note that he's a sociopath since he was put in prison before he became of legal age, but if you look up the definition, it describes him perfectly. The first time I realized that, it gave me chills. I could go into detail about him, but the short of it is, I hate him. He's my brother, and regardless of how he joined the family, that is a fact. But after he hurt others and tried to end my father, I stopped talking to him. That was 5 or 6 years ago. I've lost count. That boy ruined my family and stole my childhood. Instead of happy memories, I have the memories of our town's cops ingrained in my head. Instead of enjoying childhood, I had to know about my mother trying to harm herself and having my father come and cry to me while I was barely still so young. The worst part of it all is watching my parents. For everything my brother did to me, he was just who he was, a manipulative sociopath. For my parents, he was their son and they were doing everything they could for him, even after he tried to end my dad. My dad is still his biggest advocate and believes he can change. It is heartbreaking to see. I know my parents are split in emotions depending on the day. Some days they believe he's making progress and will see the light. Those are the hardest, as I have to decide whether to remind them he's manipulating them to get what he wants or if I should let them have false hope. Some days they feel the way I do, that he has driven them to bankruptcy, ruined their futures, and made them miss their backburner's life. I'm not really into these things, so all I got from this dude's story is that he did bad things and has a lot of letters in his psych eval. Phew. Story 7. There is a grieving process that happens. You love the child you brought into the world. At some point, that child changed. In our case, it was during elementary school. The grown woman who I gave birth to 24 years ago is not the same person I once knew and loved. So I miss the sweet child I knew, and I do my best to protect myself and those I love from the woman she became. Ultimately, as a parent, I kept her alive until she was 18. Technically, this is where my job stopped. Don't get me wrong, I did a ton over the years. She spent the vast majority of her life in various long-term residential treatment centers that were provided to us via special education. She had been in treatment for over half her life. No, not just medication or only medication. They do a lot to try to keep them out of residential treatment centers. Once she turned legal, it became time for me to take care of myself, and part of that required me to put my safety first. For the record, she is and was my only child. My ex-husband and his current wife have 5 children. To my knowledge, one of them is also very unstable, for lack of better words. I hope you enjoy the video. And if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy Parents, what did your child do for you to never forgive them? Story 4 is crippling for a parent. See you in that video.